You cost us 4 minutes because you wanted every word translated. Valerie Sloane's voice cut across the emergency review room with the calm of someone used to making cruelty sound procedural. Across the table, Amara Yusuf sat in pale blue scrubs, hands folded, her badge turned backward against her chest. The yellow card usually clipped behind it was gone. Valerie had taken it hours earlier in front of the triage staff, holding it as though it were proof of incompetence. Now it rested beside the board chair's folder. On the wall, a digital stroke timer glowed in red, 001142. 11 minutes and 42 seconds between the patient's arrival and the first documented stroke alert. Valerie tapped the table. The patient was confused. The family was emotional. Nurse Yusuf complicated triage by insisting on an interpreter when visual assessment was sufficient. No one answered. The room overlooked the emergency entrance where ambulances slid beneath white lights and vanished behind automatic doors. Down there, everything moved by seconds. Up here, people were deciding whose seconds mattered. Board chair Robert Hale reached for the laptop remote. Play the call. Valerie's smile thinned. We already reviewed the chart. We are not reviewing the chart. A speaker clicked. First came static, then a prompt from the hospital interpreter line, then Amara's voice, controlled but urgent. This is Nurse Yusuf in the east hallway. Adult female sudden speech change, right side weakness reported by daughter. Primary language Somali. I need immediate interpretation and a documented symptom onset time. A chair scraped near the end of the table. Valerie did not move, but one finger stopped against her leather portfolio. The recording continued. A frightened woman spoke quickly. Another voice interpreted. She says her mother dropped the cup at breakfast. Her mouth changed. She could not lift her arm. It began before they left home. The silence changed texture. Robert paused the audio. What time was this call placed? Hospital attorney Claire Benton checked the log. 8:14 and 26 seconds. The stroke timer export appeared beside the red numbers. Patient arrival 8:09. Initial triage entry dizziness, possible dehydration. Interpreter request 8:14. Stroke alert entered 8:21. Valerie leaned forward. That does not establish causation. The physician made the diagnosis. Amara raised her eyes. She had said almost nothing since entering the room. Her stillness belonged to someone who knew that speaking too early gave powerful people time to bury the truth. Robert pressed play again. The daughter says her mother was normal at 7:45. Then the cup fell. Her words became wrong. A physician's voice entered the recording from somewhere in the hallway. Stroke team, now. The call ended. Claire slid a printed page toward the center of the table. The metadata confirms the stroke protocol began while Nurse Yusuf was still connected to the interpreter line. Valerie's hand moved toward the yellow card. Amara moved first. She placed 2 fingers on it, not pulling it away, only stopping Valerie from touching it. That card did not delay treatment, Amara said. Her voice held no anger. That made the words land harder. It told me who to call when everyone else had decided they already understood. For the first time, Valerie's certainty cracked. Outside the glass wall, an emergency helicopter crossed the Omaha sky. Its shadow passed over the room, then vanished. Robert opened a second file. We have one more question. Why was Nurse Yusuf removed from triage 3 minutes after this call? Valerie's eyes flicked toward the attorney. No one came to help her. Because the answer was not buried in an opinion or a memory that could be dismissed. It was inside the hospital's system. And before that morning ended, the same numbers Valerie used to measure efficiency would show the board how close her shortcut had come to costing a woman her life. But to understand why Amara made that call from a hallway phone after being ordered not to the story, had to return to the yellow card clipped behind her badge and to another patient years earlier whose words arrived too late. 3 days before the review, Amara Yusuf arrived at Platte River Medical Center at 6:37 in the morning, carrying black coffee in a steel cup and wearing the same yellow card she had clipped behind her badge for nearly 9 years. It was no larger than a playing card. Across the front, in small black print, were the hospital's interpreter access number, the language identification chart, and the steps for documenting a translated call. The corners had softened from use. A clear strip of tape covered a crease through the center. Most nurses used the number saved in the computer system. Amara carried the card because computers froze passwords expired and emergencies did not wait for anyone to find the right tab. She began each shift the same way. She checked the trauma rooms, counted the stroke kits, replaced 2 missing blood pressure cuffs, and read the overnight notes before the morning rush arrived. By 7:15, the waiting room had begun to fill. A construction worker held a towel against his hand. An older man coughed into his sleeve. A young mother bounced a feverish toddler beneath the television while a weather report warned of freezing rain moving across eastern Nebraska. Amara moved between them with quiet precision. She spoke English, Somali, Arabic, and enough Swahili to recognize when a patient was agreeing out of fear rather than understanding. She never presented this as a gift. To her, language was simply another vital sign. A patient could smile while denying pain. A father could nod without knowing what surgery had been proposed. A frightened woman could answer the wrong question because she was trying not to cause trouble. Amara had learned that long before Omaha. At 26, she had worked in a refugee clinic where one translator served 3 buildings and more than a dozen languages. One afternoon, an elderly man arrived, complaining through gestures that his chest felt heavy. The clinic was crowded, the interpreter was busy, someone assumed the man meant heartburn. Amara had waited. 23 minutes later, when the translator finally reached them, the man described pain traveling into his jaw and left arm. The ambulance came quickly after that, but not quickly enough. He died that evening. No supervisor blamed Amara. The clinic lacked staff funding and equipment. Everyone told her she had followed procedure. But she remembered the man's hand gripping the edge of the exam table. She remembered how patiently he had waited for someone to understand him. And she remembered the terrible difference between hearing a voice and listening to what it meant. The yellow card came from that clinic. When Amara left for the United States, one of the senior nurses handed it to her and said, "Never let a busy room convince you that a person has nothing important to say." Amara had carried it through nursing exams, night shifts, influenza surges, and the first winter after her husband died. She had carried it while raising their daughter alone and working enough overtime to cover tuition rent and the money she still sent to relatives abroad. The card had no financial value, but every crease held a promise. At 8:05 that morning, charge nurse Megan Cole approached the desk with a staffing sheet. "Interpreter coverage changed again," she said quietly. Amara scanned the page. The in-person interpreter who normally covered mornings had been reassigned. Video translation units would handle most calls with the phone line reserved for cases approved by a supervisor. "Approved before the call?" Amara asked. Megan gave a small, tired shrug. "That is what the new directive says. Emergency symptoms do not wait for approval." "I know." Across the top of the directive was Valerie Sloan's signature. During her first year as CEO, Valerie had reduced average waiting time by 11 minutes. Her photograph appeared in hospital newsletters beside words like modernization, accountability, and excellence. She spoke often about efficiency. She spoke less often about what disappeared when care became too fast to question itself. At 8:20, Valerie entered the emergency department with 2 administrators behind her. She wore a gray suit and moved through the room without touching anything. "Current average?" she asked. Megan checked the board. 27 minutes. "Our target is 22. We are short 2 nurses. Then move faster with the staff you have." Valerie's attention settled on Amara's badge. "What is that yellow card?" "Interpreter access instructions. All staff have access through the electronic system. The card works when the system does not." Valerie gave a thin smile. "Or it encourages unnecessary calls." Amara held her gaze. "Patients are not unnecessary." One administrator lowered his eyes to his tablet. Valerie did not answer immediately. She examined the crowded waiting room as if it were a column of numbers refusing to behave. "Every added step increases door time," she said. "Use clinical judgment before adding delays." Then she moved on. Megan waited until Valerie was out of earshot. "You need to be careful." "I was careful." "That is not what I meant." Amara adjusted the card behind her badge. Near the ambulance entrance, a red light blinked above the automatic doors. Somewhere beyond them, sirens were approaching through the freezing rain. The dispatch screen updated. "Female patient, altered speech, weakness, family reports possible dizziness, language barrier, estimated arrival 4 minutes." Amara read the line twice. Then she checked the interpreter number on the yellow card, though she knew every digit by heart. Valerie Sloan believed every emergency department had 2 kinds of problems, the ones that harmed patients and the ones that harmed the hospital's numbers. Lately, she treated them as if they were the same. At 9 o'clock that morning, she stood beneath the glass wall of the executive conference room and presented a dashboard to department leaders. Red arrows marked missed targets, green arrows marked improvement. Average waiting time, patients who left before evaluation, length of stay. Interpreter use appeared near the bottom under operational delays. Valerie tapped that line with a silver pen. This category increased 18% last quarter. Megan sat near the end of the table with her staffing sheet folded in half. "We also had more non-English speaking patients. Then we should become more efficient at assessing them." Amara had not been invited to the meeting, but the exchange traveled through the emergency department before noon. In hospitals, bad policies moved faster than medicine. The directive was simple. Use the electronic translation system first. Request a live interpreter only when medically necessary. Obtain supervisor approval when the call might delay triage. No one had defined medically necessary. No one had explained how a nurse was supposed to prove that translation mattered before knowing what the patient was trying to say. That uncertainty was useful to Valerie. It placed the risk on the staff while allowing leadership to claim the service still existed. Publicly, Valerie spoke about inclusive care. Her office displayed photographs from cultural outreach events, and the hospital website featured her beside families from several immigrant communities. Privately, she called interpreter use a bottleneck. She did not hate patients who spoke other languages. Her thinking was colder than that. She believed nearly anything could be reduced to process, and anything that resisted reduction was probably being handled badly. The hospital board had tied part of her contract renewal to performance targets. A competing medical center had opened across the river, and Valerie was determined to prove Platte River could move patients faster with fewer resources. Every delayed case felt personal to her. By noon, staff had begun making smaller choices. A nurse used a teenage son to explain discharge instructions because the video unit was charging. A clerk repeated the same English question louder to an elderly patient. A physician marked poor historian in a chart after a woman failed to describe her medication clearly. Amara noticed each one. She corrected what she could without creating a scene. She moved the teenager out of the interpreter role. She found a second video unit. She rewrote one intake note after learning the patient had not misunderstood the question. The question had never been translated. Small repairs. Small acts of resistance. At 1:40, Megan found Amara cleaning a treatment room. Valerie asked about you. Amara continued wiping the rail. What did she ask? How often you use the interpreter line? And what did you say? The truth. Amara dropped the cloth into the bin. Megan lowered her voice. She thinks you are challenging the directive. I am following nursing standards. She does not see it that way. Patients do not change symptoms to match how she sees things. Megan glanced toward the corridor before answering. I am trying to protect you. Amara softened. I know. That was the worst part. Megan was not weak. She was responsible for an understaffed department, a mortgage, and 2 children in college. Valerie rarely threatened people directly. She made them understand how replaceable they were. At 2:15, Amara treated a warehouse worker named Luis who had fallen from a loading platform. He spoke limited English and kept touching the side of his neck. The intake note listed shoulder pain. Amara requested the video interpreter. The unit connected after 3 attempts. Luis explained that his neck had snapped backward when he landed and that 2 fingers had become numb. Amara stopped the assessment and called for spinal precautions. The imaging later showed a cervical fracture that had not shifted. The physician thanked her quietly. Valerie arrived before Luis had been transferred upstairs. Why did this triage take 19 minutes? Because his complaint was documented incorrectly. His injury was identified. After we understood him, Valerie checked the board. You tied up a translation unit for 7 minutes. He had numbness in his hand. You could have established that through demonstration. He was also describing the mechanism of injury. Valerie's expression remained pleasant, but her voice dropped. You have a habit of turning every language difference into a special event. Amara felt the old refugee clinic rise inside her, the crowded room, the patient gripping the table, the minutes everyone had called reasonable. She kept her tone even. I have a habit of wanting the correct history. 2 nurses nearby stopped pretending not to listen. Valerie reached for Amara's badge, then seemed to reconsider. Her pen touched the edge of the yellow card instead. This is not your personal clinic, she said. We operate at scale. Amara covered the card with one hand. No, this is a hospital. For 1 second, something sharper than annoyance crossed Valerie's face. Then she stepped back. Document the delay. I documented the fracture risk. Document both. Valerie walked away, leaving the instruction behind like a warning. That evening, Amara opened Luis's chart to complete her notes. The system showed a new administrative flag beside her name. Interpreter utilization review. She read the phrase twice. It was not formal discipline, not yet. But it meant Valerie had begun building a record. At the next station, Megan stared at the same screen. You could transfer out of triage for a while, she said. Let this settle. Amara thought of choosing an easier assignment. She thought of finishing her shift without conflict, going home to her daughter, and letting someone else decide when a voice deserved translation. Then the ambulance doors opened. Freezing rain blew across the floor. Paramedics rushed in with an older woman on a stretcher and a frightened daughter struggling to keep pace beside them. The patient's right hand lay curled against her body. Her mouth pulled unevenly when she tried to speak. The daughter said something in Somali, fast, breathless, unmistakable. Amara heard only 6 words before a paramedic talked over her. But 6 words were enough. She was normal before the cup fell. Amara reached for the yellow card. Amara met the stretcher before the wheels locked. The patient was a woman in her late 60s, wrapped in a brown wool coat damp with sleet. Her eyes were open, but confusion moved across her face each time someone spoke. The daughter gripped the side rail. Her name is Hawa, Amara said to the paramedic. When was she last normal? The paramedic glanced at his tablet. Family says this morning. Maybe dizziness. Blood sugar is normal. The daughter spoke again in Somali. Amara caught the words for cup, hand, mouth, and suddenly. She is describing a sudden neurologic change, Amara said. We need a stroke screen and an interpreter now. A resident lifted Hawa's right arm. It drifted toward the mattress. Possible, he said. But she is following some commands. She is watching our gestures, Amara replied. That is not the same as understanding. Megan hurried over with the triage tablet. Room 6 is open. Amara clipped a pulse oximeter onto Hawa's finger while the team moved. Call the stroke physician. The resident hesitated. Let's finish the history first. That is why I need the interpreter. At the desk, the translation icon on the computer spun without connecting. Amara tried again. No response. She reached behind her badge and read the phone number from the yellow card, even though she already knew it. Megan placed a hand over the keypad. Supervisor approval, she whispered. This is medically necessary. I agree, but Valerie is still in the department. Howa tried to speak. The sound came out thick and broken. Her daughter pointed to her mother's mouth, then to the clock above the nurse's station. Tears gathered along her lower lashes. Amara could feel the minutes leaving. "We do not have time to protect ourselves from a policy," she said. She dialed. Before the call connected, Valerie's voice came from behind them. "What are you doing?" Amara kept the receiver against her ear, requesting an interpreter for a possible stroke. Was the electronic unit attempted? Twice. Then use visual assessment and basic commands until it reconnects. The daughter knows the onset time. Valerie held out her hand. "Give me the phone." Amara did not. Around them, the emergency department continued moving, but attention had shifted. Staff carried supplies more slowly. A clerk paused with a chart in her hand. The interpreter service answered. Amara gave the hospital code. Valerie pressed the disconnect button on the desk phone. The line went dead. A hot, stunned silence passed through Amara's chest. "She may be inside the treatment window," Amara said. "And she may not be having a stroke," Valerie replied. "You are creating a resource delay before a physician has confirmed the need. The physician needs an accurate onset time to make that decision." Valerie faced Megan. "Move Nurse Yusuf off triage." Megan's mouth tightened. "Valerie, now!" Howa's daughter spoke louder, desperation breaking through each word. Amara answered her in Somali. "I hear you. Stay with your mother." Valerie's attention snapped back. "You are not assigned as her interpreter." "I am not interpreting consent or treatment. I am calming her." "You are interfering with the established process." The resident checked Howa's pupils, then asked her to smile. One side of her face barely moved. "We should page stroke," he said. Valerie's jaw hardened. "Then page stroke. We do not need a separate language call to recognize facial weakness." Amara watched the resident enter an order. "Routine neurologic evaluation, not stroke alert." Routine meant the patient waited behind two other imaging requests. Amara pointed to the screen. "That order is wrong." The resident's cheeks colored. "I am still assessing." The daughter said the symptoms began suddenly after breakfast. "You only heard part of the sentence." "That is exactly why we need the call." Valerie reached for the card behind Amara's badge. Amara moved back. "Do not touch me." Several faces lifted. Valerie stopped, then smiled with the practiced patience she used in public interviews. "Nurse Yusuf, you are emotionally invested in this issue. That is affecting your judgment." The accusation landed exactly where Valerie intended. Amara remembered the refugee clinic, the man's hand gripping the table, the supervisor telling her that grief could make nurses unreliable. For half a second, guilt blurred the room. Then Howa's daughter said the sentence again. This time she held up her phone, pointing to a photograph stamped 7:43 a.m. In it, Howa stood in a kitchen, smiling, a white cup in her right hand. The daughter pointed to the cup, then let her own hand fall open. Amara understood the shape of the story. Normal at 7:43. Cup dropped minutes later. Speech changed immediately. The medication window was still open, but not for long. Amara faced Megan. "Please document that photo." Valerie stepped between them. "No more informal interpretation. Nurse Yusuf, report to observation." The yellow card caught against Valerie's fingers. She pulled it free from Amara's badge. The plastic clip snapped. Valerie held the card above the desk while the broken clip dropped to the floor. "These shortcuts are exactly why triage times keep rising," she said. "Delays caused by accents cost this hospital ratings." No one defended her. No one defended Amara either. That hurt more. Megan finally spoke. "I will take over the patient." But her voice carried the careful neutrality of someone standing between conscience and a paycheck. Amara was escorted toward the observation corridor by an assistant manager. Behind her, Howa remained in room 6 without a documented onset time. At the corridor corner, Amara glanced at the wall clock. 8:13. The assistant manager handed her a temporary assignment sheet. "You need to let the physician handle it. The physician does not have the history. It is not your case anymore." Through the open doors, Amara saw the resident leave Howa's room to answer another page. She saw the daughter alone beside the stretcher. She saw Valerie place the yellow card into her portfolio. Then Amara heard a phone ring from the empty family consultation room. An old beige hallway phone sat on the wall inside. It was outside the triage station, outside Valerie's line of sight, and still connected to the hospital operator. Amara entered the room, closed the door halfway, and lifted the receiver. Her hand shook once. Then it steadied. She called the interpreter line, identified herself, and asked for Somali emergency translation. When the interpreter answered, Amara walked back into the hallway and raised her voice toward Hawa's daughter. "Tell her exactly what happened this morning." The daughter answered through tears. The interpreter began documenting every word. Normal at 7:45. Cup dropped at 7:51. Right arm weakness. Speech change. No prior symptoms. Amara wrote the times on the back of her assignment sheet. At 8:14, she called the stroke team directly. She knew Valerie might suspend her. She knew she might lose triage permanently. But she also knew what waiting sounded like when a patient had no language the room was willing to hear. At the far end of the corridor, Valerie emerged from room 6. She saw the phone in Amara's hand. And the expression on her face made one thing clear. This was no longer a disagreement about policy. Valerie intended to make Amara pay for disobeying her. By 8:16, the stroke team had been paged. By 8:17, Valerie had ordered Amara away from the hallway phone. By 8:18, Hawa's daughter had given the interpreter a complete timeline that no one in triage had bothered to obtain. And by 8:19, Valerie Sloan had decided the emergency was no longer Hawa's condition. It was Amara's refusal to obey. "End the call," Valerie said. Amara kept the receiver against her ear. The interpreter was repeating the symptoms back for confirmation. Sudden right arm weakness, facial droop, speech change beginning at approximately 7:51. Amara wrote each phrase on the back of the observation assignment sheet. Valerie reached for the phone cord. Amara shifted between her and the wall. "This call is documenting a possible stroke. You are no longer assigned to the patient. The symptoms do not disappear because you reassigned me." The assistant manager stood nearby, holding the temporary staffing sheet as if it might shield her from responsibility. Valerie pointed toward the observation wing. "Go now, or I will have security remove you." Behind them, Hawa's daughter called out in Somali. The interpreter translated through the receiver. "She is asking why no one is helping her mother." Amara's throat tightened. She answered in English so every person in the corridor could understand. "They are helping her. I am making sure they know when it started." Valerie's voice became quieter. "That is enough." She took the receiver from Amara's hand and hung it on the wall. The call ended with a hard plastic click. For a moment, Amara saw the refugee clinic again. A crowded room, a man waiting politely while his heart failed. A translator arriving after the most important minutes were gone. She had spent 13 years telling herself she would never let that happen in front of her again. Now the same silence had been created deliberately. Megan hurried from room 6. "The stroke resident is here," Good Valerie said. "Then Nurse Yusuf's involvement is over." Megan held a sheet of handwritten notes. "We still need a reliable last known well time." Amara lifted the assignment page. 7:45 confirmed normal. Cup dropped at 7:51. Speech and right arm weakness began immediately. Valerie took the paper before Megan could reach it. "This was obtained during an unauthorized interpreter call." "It is still the history," Amara said. "It is undocumented and procedurally compromised. The interpreter line records every call." Valerie's eyes hardened. That was the first moment Amara realized the call itself might survive even if Valerie destroyed the paper. Valerie folded the assignment sheet once, then again. She placed it inside her portfolio beside the yellow translation card. Megan stared at her. "Why are you taking the—" "Because it is part of a disciplinary incident. It is also the patient's symptom timeline. The physician can obtain it independently." From room 6 came the sound of a metal tray striking the floor. Hawa's daughter cried out. The stroke resident pushed into the corridor. "She is worsening. We need CT now." A transport nurse unlocked the stretcher and began moving. Amara followed instinctively. Valerie blocked her path. "You are not going with them. I can tell the physician the onset time. You have already exceeded your role." The resident paused. "What onset time?" Amara spoke before Valerie could answer. "Normal at 7:45, symptoms at 7:51. The daughter confirmed it through the interpreter line. The resident's attention sharpened. "Who documented that?" "I did." Valerie cut in. "The information was collected outside approved procedure and has not been verified." The resident glanced between them. Behind him, Hawa's right arm had gone completely still. "Use 7:51 provisionally," he said. "Activate full stroke protocol." Megan entered the order. A red banner appeared on the tracking screen. "Stroke alert, 8:21. Amara watched the timestamp appear. 7 minutes after her interpreter call. 10 minutes after the first clear physical sign had been seen. Valerie noticed her watching. "Do not confuse a physician's decision with your own," she said. "I am not confused." "Then understand this. You abandoned your assignment, violated a direct instruction, accessed a restricted service, and communicated with a patient after being removed from care. I documented symptoms during a medical emergency. You broke policy to prevent a delay. You caused one." The accusation carried across the emergency department. Staff near the desk stopped speaking. A patient's family member lowered his phone. 2 paramedics remained beside an empty stretcher listening. Valerie opened her portfolio and removed the yellow card. She held it between 2 fingers. This is what happens when employees substitute personal beliefs for hospital standards. Amara saw the broken plastic edge where the clip had snapped. Valerie placed the card on the counter. "Delays caused by accents cost this hospital ratings." The sentence landed harder in public than it had near the phone. One nurse flinched. Megan's face changed. Even the assistant manager lowered the staffing sheet. Amara felt humiliation burn across her skin, but she did not raise her voice. Her accent did not delay care. Valerie crossed her arms. "Your fixation on translation did. The translation gave you the onset time. The physician identified the stroke." After the call, Valerie's expression tightened. "You are suspended from clinical duties pending review." Megan stepped forward. She acted in good faith. "This is not your decision." "Then whose decision is the patient?" Valerie faced her slowly. Megan stopped, but the question remained between them. Security arrived with a hospital administrator named Daniel Ross. He approached Amara, carefully embarrassed by the task. "I need your badge." Amara unfastened it. Without the yellow card behind it, the badge felt strangely light. She placed it in his palm. Across the department, Hawa's daughter stood near the CT doors, unable to follow. She saw Amara surrounded by administrators and began speaking urgently. No one answered her. Amara did. She touched her chest and said in Somali, "They are treating your mother now." The daughter pressed both hands together beneath her chin. Valerie heard the exchange. "I told you not to act as an interpreter." "That was not medical consent," Amara said. "I told her she was not alone." Daniel shifted his weight. "Amara, please." She nodded. Before leaving, she faced Valerie. "You can remove me from the floor. You cannot remove the time that call was made." Valerie's composure slipped, only slightly, but Amara saw it. So did Megan. Amara was escorted through the waiting room while patients watched her pass in scrubs without a badge. At the employee exit, Daniel gave her a formal suspension notice printed from the administrative office. The stated reason was insubordination resulting in treatment delay. Amara read the phrase beneath the fluorescent lights. For one terrible minute, she wondered whether Valerie would succeed. Policies could be rewritten, notes could be challenged, witnesses could become afraid. And Hawa was still somewhere behind the locked doors, racing toward the edge of a medication window that would not reopen. Then Megan came through the exit carrying a folded printout. She did not hand it to Amara. Security cameras were above them. She only held it low enough for Amara to see. At the top was the interpreter system's automatic call entry. Date, extension, language requested. Connection time, 8:14:26. Below it, the call duration continued for 4 minutes and 38 seconds. The record existed, and deep inside Platte River Medical Center's servers, the voice Valerie had tried to silence had already been saved. The emergency review began at 6:30 the next morning. Amara entered the executive conference room in clean scrubs without a badge. She had slept less than 2 hours. Her daughter had waited at the kitchen table while Amara reread the suspension notice until the words began to blur. Insubordination resulting in treatment delay. Valerie sat across from her with the same leather portfolio she had carried through the emergency department. The yellow translation card lay beside it. Board Chair Robert Hale opened the meeting. "This is an emergency clinical review, not a final disciplinary hearing. We are here to establish what happened, whether patient care was delayed, and whether current interpreter restrictions contributed to the event." Valerie answered before anyone else could. The restrictions did not contribute. Nurse Yusuf ignored a direct order, bypassed established workflow, and created confusion during an active case. Claire Benton, the hospital attorney, rested a hand on a stack of printed pages. Patient Hawa Abdi received clot-busting medication at 8:47 a.m. She was within the accepted treatment window. Valerie nodded, which confirms the system worked. Amara said nothing. Claire continued, "The fact that treatment occurred does not tell us whether avoidable delay occurred before it." Valerie's pen stopped moving. Robert faced Megan, who had been asked to attend as charge nurse. "When did you first suspect stroke?" Megan drew a breath. When the patient arrived, Nurse Yusuf identified right arm drift facial asymmetry and a report of sudden speech change from the daughter. "Was a stroke alert entered then?" "No." "Why not?" "The resident wanted more history. The electronic translation unit would not connect." Valerie leaned toward the table. "Clinical uncertainty is normal in emergency medicine. That does not prove misconduct." Robert nodded to Claire. "Play the first record." The room speaker clicked. A system voice announced the date, hospital code, and extension. Then Amara's voice filled the conference room. "This is Nurse Yusuf in the east hallway. Adult female sudden speech change, right side weakness reported by daughter. Primary language Somali. I need immediate interpretation and a documented symptom onset time." The interpreter asked Amara to connect the patient's family member. Valerie interrupted. "We know she made the call. That is not disputed." Claire did not stop the audio. Hawa's daughter spoke through tears. The interpreter translated steadily. "My mother was normal when I took the photograph. She held the cup in her right hand. A few minutes later it fell. Her mouth changed and she could not lift that arm." The recording captured Amara asking for the photograph's time. 7:43 a.m. It captured the daughter estimating the cup fell at 7:51. It captured Amara repeating both times. Then another sound entered the call. A man's voice from the hallway. "What are you doing?" Valerie's voice. No one at the table moved. The recording continued. Amara said, requesting an interpreter for a possible stroke. Valerie ordered the call ended. There was a brief struggle near the phone, followed by the disconnect tone. Valerie sat straighter. "That recording lacks context." Megan's eyes lifted toward her. Robert paused the file. "What context would change the patient's reported onset time?" The report had not been clinically verified. Claire slid the interpreter log across the table. The call was connected at 8:14:26. The daughter reported a specific onset sequence before the formal stroke alert was entered. Valerie pushed the page back. "A nurse's suspicion does not activate treatment. A physician does." Amara finally spoke. No one claimed otherwise. Her calm drew every face toward her. But the physician needed the history. The history was available at 8:14. Valerie's voice sharpened. "You were not qualified to make the diagnosis." "I did not diagnose her. I heard what her daughter was trying to tell us." Robert opened another document. "This is the stroke door-to-needle timer export." A timeline appeared on the wall monitor. 80903 patient arrival. 81118 initial neurologic signs entered. 81426 interpreter call connected. 81841 interpreter call disconnected. 82107 stroke alert entered. 82952 CT initiated. 83615 CT cleared for treatment. 84709 medication administered. The numbers stood in a clean vertical line. No emotion, no interpretation, just sequence. Claire pointed to the gap. The system recorded possible neurologic symptoms at 8:11. The interpreter call established a usable last known well time by approximately 8:16. The full alert was not entered until 8:21. Valerie folded her arms. 5 minutes did not change the outcome. A physician joining by video answered from the screen. Dr. Andrew Patel, Director of Stroke Services, had reviewed Hawa's imaging overnight. We cannot say that. Valerie shifted toward him. The patient received treatment. Yes, near the later edge of the internal target. Still within the medication window. Dr. Patel's expression remained controlled. In stroke care, preserved minutes matter even when the final administration remains technically within the window. We do not defend a delay by saying the patient survived it. The words settled heavily. Robert asked, would the interpreter information have justified activating the stroke protocol earlier? Yes. At what point? When sudden unilateral weakness, facial change, speech disturbance, and a clear last known well time were documented. Claire touched the call log. That occurred during this call. Valerie removed her glasses. The call was unauthorized. Dr. Patel replied the symptoms were not. Megan lowered her eyes, but Amara saw relief move across her face. Valerie reached for another argument. The resident independently observed facial droop. At 8:20, Claire said, the physician still made the final decision. At 8:21, Robert said, the room had understood before Valerie did. The call had not interfered with the correct protocol. It had reached it first. Valerie's pen clicked once, twice, then stopped. This is being framed unfairly. Nurse Yusuf was insubordinate and emotionally compromised because of a prior personal experience. She has admitted that language access is an issue she feels strongly about. Amara's hands remained still on the table. Robert frowned. How do you know about her prior experience? Valerie hesitated. No one had discussed the refugee clinic during the review. Megan answered quietly. Amara disclosed it years ago during a staff education session. Claire's expression hardened. You used information from an employee training disclosure to question her competence during an emergency. I considered a possible source of bias. Amara met Valerie's eyes. You called it bias because calling it experience would mean I knew what I was hearing. Valerie opened her portfolio. I will not be lectured by an employee who ignored a direct order. She pulled out the yellow card. This card is not hospital-issued equipment. It should never have been used to bypass approved channels. Amara reached across the table. Valerie held it back. Robert said, return it. It is evidence. So is the interpreter log. We made a copy. Return her property. Valerie placed the card on the table. Amara did not pick it up immediately. She addressed Robert instead. I want one thing entered into the review. Claire prepared to write. The problem was not that the hospital lacked an interpreter service. The problem was that staff were taught to fear using it. No one interrupted. When approval becomes more important than understanding the patient, people start guessing. They use children. They use gestures. They label patients confused or difficult. Most of the time, nobody sees the harm because the mistake never gets named. She rested her fingertips on the worn yellow edge. Yesterday, the mistake had a clock. Robert leaned back. What action are you requesting? Amara could have asked only for her suspension to be lifted. She could have demanded an apology or protection for herself. Instead, she said, restore immediate interpreter access in emergency triage. Remove supervisor approval for time-sensitive cases. Review every language-related delay since the directive began, and make it clear that no nurse will be punished for asking to understand a patient. Valerie gave a quiet laugh without warmth. You are trying to rewrite hospital policy from this table. No, Amara said. I am asking the board to stop a policy that almost rewrote a woman's future. Robert closed the timer export. The directive is suspended effective immediately. Valerie stared at him. You cannot make an operational decision without executive review. I am the board chair. This is executive review. Claire added, outside counsel will examine the interpreter restrictions, the removal of Nurse Yusuf from care, and the use of her personal history during discipline. Megan spoke next. I also want my statement recorded. Robert nodded. Valerie took the written onset times from Amara and placed them in her portfolio. She said the information was procedurally compromised. Those notes were not given to the stroke resident. Valerie's face changed. That is not an accurate characterization. The folded page is still in your portfolio, Megan said. Every gaze dropped to the leather case. Valerie did not open it. Claire did. Inside was Amara's observation assignment sheet folded twice. On the back in Amara's handwriting, normal 7:45, cup fell 7:51. Right arm weak, speech changed immediately. Claire laid it beside the interpreter log. The same facts, the same sequence. One recorded by a system Valerie could not control. One written by the nurse she had tried to remove from the story. Robert's voice became formal. Valerie Sloan, you are relieved of direct oversight of emergency operations pending board review. You will not contact Nurse Yusuf or any witness about this matter outside counsel's presence. Valerie's chair pushed back. You are disciplining a CEO because an employee disliked a performance policy. No, Robert said. We are opening an investigation because a performance policy may have interfered with patient care and because you concealed clinical information while blaming the nurse who obtained it. Valerie gathered her papers, but Claire kept the portfolio. For the first time since Amara had known her, Valerie had nothing in her hands. Amara clipped the yellow card to the pocket of her scrubs using a temporary safety pin Megan had brought. The gesture was small, but everyone watched it. At the door, Dr. Patel's voice came through the monitor. One more update. Hawa is awake, her speech has improved, and she has movement in her right hand. Amara lowered her head for a moment. Not in defeat, in release. The minutes had not returned, but they had been enough. And this time, the patient's words had arrived before it was too late. By noon, Amara's suspension had been lifted. The notice arrived by email first, then in print, signed by Robert Hale and hospital counsel. It stated that she had acted in the interest of patient safety and would return to clinical duties without loss of pay. There was no celebration in the emergency department. Hospitals rarely pause long enough for that. The waiting room remained full. Monitors continued chiming. A child cried behind a curtain while a transport team hurried toward the elevators. But when Amara entered through the staff doors, conversation stopped for a different reason than before. Megan met her beside the nurse's station and handed back her badge. I replaced the clip, she said. Behind it, the yellow translation card sat beneath a new plastic cover. Amara ran one thumb over the sealed edge. You did not have to. I know. Megan's eyes filled, though she smiled. The interpreter restrictions were removed that afternoon. Live telephone interpretation became available from every emergency department phone without supervisor approval. 2 video units were transferred from administrative offices to triage, and the hospital restored an in-person morning interpreter before the week ended. A new directive appeared at the top of every staff inbox. Language access was part of emergency assessment. Requesting interpretation would not be counted as an avoidable delay. No employee would face discipline for using it in good faith. Valerie's name was not beneath the announcement. The board placed her on administrative leave while outside counsel reviewed the policy, the hidden symptom notes, and several earlier complaints that staff had been afraid to raise. Her photograph remained in the lobby for 2 more days. Then someone removed it. The empty space on the wall was not dramatic. It was only a pale rectangle where the surrounding paint had faded. Still, people noticed. 3 weeks later, the board announced that Valerie would not return as chief executive. The official statement cited failures in clinical oversight and conduct during the stroke case. Amara read it once. She felt no triumph. Valerie had believed that speed and care were enemies, and she had made other people carry the cost of proving her wrong. Losing authority was a consequence, not a victory. The real measure was in room 412. Hawa sat beside the window with a knitted blanket across her knees. Her right hand still trembled when she lifted it, but she could close her fingers around a paper cup. Her daughter stood nearby. When Amara entered, the daughter's face opened with recognition. She crossed the room and took both of Amara's hands. At first, she spoke quickly in Somali. Then she slowed, though Amara understood every word. You heard me when everyone else heard noise. Amara tried to answer, but the daughter continued. My mother remembers your voice. Hawa raised the cup slightly. Her smile pulled more strongly on one side, but it was a smile. Amara sat beside her. You did the hard work, she said in Somali. You came back. Hawa touched the yellow card clipped behind Amara's badge. Then she said 2 quiet words. Thank you. No interpreter stood between them. No screen translated the moment. Amara had heard gratitude many times in her career, but this reached a place inside her that had remained closed since the refugee clinic. For years, she had carried the memory of the man whose symptoms were understood too late. She had treated the yellow card as a promise to him, but also as a punishment she had never admitted she was giving herself. She could not change what had happened in that crowded clinic. She could not recover those 23 minutes. But she had refused to lose another patient to the same silence. And this time, someone had lived long enough to tell her that listening mattered. 2 months later, Platte River Medical Center opened a language access training room near the emergency department. The walls held no executive portraits. Instead, one display showed simple examples of how words such as dizziness, weakness, pressure, and numbness could conceal very different emergencies when translated poorly. Amara helped design the training. She refused the title Valerie's replacement first offered her. She did not want to leave nursing for an office. Instead, she accepted protected teaching hours and remained in triage where the work was immediate and voices were easiest to lose. New employees learned one rule from her before they studied the interpreter equipment. Do not ask whether translation will slow you down, she told them. Ask what you might miss without it. The yellow card remained clipped to her badge. Its old crease was visible beneath the clear cover. The broken corner had not been trimmed away. Amara kept it that way deliberately. A repaired object did not need to pretend it had never been damaged. One winter morning, nearly a year after Hawa's stroke, freezing rain struck the ambulance doors again. A family entered with an older man who spoke almost no English. He pressed a hand to his chest while his son struggled to explain. A young nurse reached for the electronic tablet, then she stopped. She lifted the nearest phone and called the interpreter line first. Amara watched from across the desk. She did not correct her. She did not need to. Outside ambulances moved beneath the white entrance lights, carrying people whose lives could change inside a single minute. Inside the hospital still measured time, but it had finally learned that efficiency was not how quickly a voice could be dismissed. It was how quickly someone chose to listen. Would you have risked your job to make that call after being ordered to stop? Share your thoughts in the comments, and subscribe for more stories about ordinary people whose quiet courage forces powerful systems to remember who they were built to serve.